Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is round 2 of the conversation on conversation. Today, I'm going to start by quickly summarizing what was said by people in the first conversation. This summary is completely inadequate. It is just to jog your memories here. I strongly encourage you to go to see the original meetup. Now, nothing in this meetup actually depends on that. So if you're watching this video, you can go ahead and watch the video, but then go ahead and click on the link in the description to go to that previous meetup. So I'm going to summarize the meetup first. The purpose of that is to jog everybody's memory, to get you ready to answer 5 questions. And I'm going to ask the questions one by one. And I invite you all to answer these questions. In order to answer the question, just type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. The 5 questions are, number 1, if you want to have a good conversation, what attitude do you need to have? What does it require of you? Number 2, if you want to have a good conversation, what do you need to hold about the other person? What do you think, what attitude do you need to have towards the other person that you're talking to? Number 3, how do you listen? What are the principles of good listening? Number 4, how do you speak? What are the principles? What do you think? How do you need to speak well? What does speaking well consist of? And number 5, what have you learned? What new idea did you get from this meetup and the meetup that we did on Wednesday? Both these meetups put together. What new thing did you learn that you did not know before? Again, I strongly recommend everybody to use pen and paper. That's the only way you can keep track of everything that is being said. So with that, let me get started with the summary. People talked, so the first question that I had asked everybody was, what is good conversation? What is the characteristic of good conversation? People said it is when you are open to learning, you're open to change. When you're respecting others, when you're looking out for cues of other people that other people are giving, it's when you're really interested in the other person and conversing and relating to them. You need to get on their level. You need to use your feeling and intuition. You need to pay attention to the tone. If there is a misunderstanding, you need to resolve that quickly. You need to let people talk by asking them follow-up questions. While speaking, you need to be clear. You need to actually not just talk at people, but listen to what they're saying and modify what you're saying accordingly, or be articulate, be logical, be objective. There has to be a level of humility about you, saying that there is a lot more to the world than I know, and I actually want to learn that. What is the characteristic of the conversation itself? It is fluid. It adds new context to you. It is reciprocal. It's win-win. There is a joint search for truth. It has exquisite timing and transitions, and it manages emotions like fear, etc. very well. Now, what do we get from a good conversation? We get the knowledge of ourselves. We get knowledge of others. We notice things about ourselves by using others as a foil. It builds openness to others, appreciation of others. It enlarges our context because other people have different contexts that we don't have. Disagreements lets you test your thoughts, correct your thoughts. You end up accepting people more. It's a way of overcoming your limitations, knowing your limitations, noticing your limitations, overcoming it. You need to have purpose, you need preparation, you need planning, you need to be aware of the context of the conversation. Why are all the parties doing the conversation? It's really good when people are giving constructive feedback. All of us need that. Just like you need it, they need it too. When done right, it produces energy. It energizes both you and the other person. It gives validation to other people. It makes people feel alive. We are social beings. Conversation is a part of our natural functions. In order to make the most of it, you have to be authentic. You have to be vulnerable. You have to build a mutual connection between people. When done right, it produces joy, love, and respect. It opens up possibilities you did not know were there, and it enriches both you and them. What is the consequence if this is done on a continual basis, on a large scale, by you and others? It calls for a joyous culture. It's a lot more fun. There is a lot more respect. People can be themselves. Unnecessary conflict doesn't even come up. There is a mutual trust and understanding that develops. There is compassion, respect for differences, respect for context, rational dialogue, more mindfulness, more intention. You learn to value each other more. As we know each other more, we value each other more. There is a calmness, lowering of temperatures in interaction. There is an acceptance of all styles of communication, more voluminous and more silent. You discover the character of people, you go by the character of people, you discover common values, you discover common virtues. Everybody acts like catalyst for each other. These are some of the things that people brought up. This is not an exhaustive list. This is a very poor summary. I would encourage you to see the original. This is only purpose of this summary here is to jog your memories and get you ready for answering the questions that follow. So the first question is, what does a good conversation require from you? Go ahead and type what kind of characteristics you need to have in order to have a good conversation. We have tendencies of saying, this is what other people need to do. First, what do you need to do? How do you need to be in order to make the most of conversations? We'll start with Joe, followed by Evanique. Joe.
I'm going to repeat what I think a little bit.
Yes, please feel free to repeat anything that anybody said, because these things we need to make part of ourselves.
Sure.
So repetition is the only way to actually do that. So everybody feel free to repeat anything that you've heard. Go ahead.
So, what I need to do is listen and be respectful. And these are the four things that I noted, which make a great conversation. Suspend my own personal judgments, and kind of know when to speak. And we're going to get into what those actually mean a little bit later. One of the important things that I think I need to do when it comes to having a good conversation or listening is kind of observe what comes up for me when somebody says something that may, cause a certain emotional reaction. And that's kind of understanding where, hey, this person's saying something, but it's what their intention is and how I'm reacting. There's a difference between those two. So not to take things personally. And I think that that's a very important thing to do. I think another thing is to something that I'd read about good dialogue is accessing your own ignorance. Is a very important thing, and really think about what you don't know about the topic that somebody's talking to you about, or what they're saying, or even what they're telling you about themselves. Because if you really start to think about what you don't know, then you're kind of suspending, and you're not just speaking what you know about from your previous experiences. And the person is starting to feel heard, and I'm starting to thinking about what they're saying and what question would be good to ask to get at the heart of what they're trying to say to me. So I think that these are a couple of things that I need to do. And that means being present. It's not allowing, not allowing my thoughts to go in one way or another. And so, I mean, a lot of this, I think, is based on the idea of listening, which we'll come to a little bit later. And what it means to be a really good listener. But this is part of the prep work that you need to do in order to go into a conversation. Is off the top of my head, those are a couple of things.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Folks, you can answer this question in one of two ways. You can ask, what does one need to do? Like what anybody needs to do in order to participate in good conversation, or you can ask it about, speak about yourself. Either is fine, or both is fine, all right? Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Katie. Evanik.
For me, number one is being interested in the person speaking, getting to know them and who they are, and, listening for who they are. I think number two, I'm going to repeat what Joe said and suspend judgment, because I can be very judgmental. So a lot of times instead of listening to understand, I'm already judging them. And so that's a quality that I can work on. And my third point is to listen to understand and not to speak. Typically I'm listening, that way I can have a response, or I'm thinking about my response, and I'm overthinking my response, and I'm not actually listening to what the person is telling me or what the person is saying. Number four is, again, repeating what you said, like, look at why I'm having the response that I have, and like, why am I judging this person for what they say? Or, why do I have this, visceral emotion when that person is speaking? And like, what is it about what they're saying is bothering me? And then finally, it's a flow. It's allowing the conversation to happen and allowing the conversation to end. Sometimes I think what I do is kind of like, I feel like sometimes the ending is awkward, or I don't have anything to say, so I'll try to think of something to say, and I'm like, well, I could just let the conversation end and be like, thank you for talking to me, and either move on to the next topic, or conversations end.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Katie, followed by David. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to answer this question. What does conversation require of you?
For me, I think I require myself to have the intention to connect to the person that I'm talking to as like at least one of my motivations. Sometimes I catch myself going like, well, why am I doing this? Or why am I saying this? Even if it's like a virtual conversation, maybe I write a Yelp review. And then I'm like, well, maybe if I write this honest point, then that will help other people connect to that person, because they'll be able to see that thing and then not be so frustrated by it. But that violates my intention to connect, because I have to want to connect to the person. So if I'm trying to meet, I can be meeting all these other motivations, but that at the base has to be like, have to want to be their friend. I have to want to be interested. And if I can't give any feedback, if there's my role for myself, if I have no intention to be their friend or connect to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. Next up is David, followed by Bruce. David.
Yeah, two additional things from all these great comments by people are, one, I mean, during a conversation, I try to think about my own biases, and I try to think about, for example, like, I mean, not to use jargon, but like, emotional flashbacks. Like, am I really responding to what the person is saying, to what's happening right there in the conversation? Or am I responding to some other memory? Am I responding to something else that this is reminding me of, or some other? So that's about paying attention, but am I truly understanding what the person is saying as opposed to what I think they're saying, or the thinking fast, thinking, so that my immediate visceral reaction to this, as opposed to, I mean, not everybody's emotional as uses persuasion, and it's not always just logical arguments, but still, am I paying attention to what the person is actually trying to convey, as opposed what I'm layering on or inferring into their actions. And the same thing is related to this. This may be sort of partial answer to the question 4 as well, is in the conversation, when I'm bringing in a conversation, I'm also thinking, what do I want to accomplish in the conversation with any response that I give? So, I mean, is a response necessary, or what do I want to accomplish in this relationship? And following on this, the great comments by Katie is, what do I want my response to? I mean, how I want this conversation to proceed, and is that a useful? I mean, is this? Do I want to create a fight about this, an argument about this? Is it necessary to respond at all? So that's all the other aspects. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Bruce, Ron, and Laura. Bruce, what does conversation require of oneself?
Well, whether it's planned ahead of time or impromptu, the first thing I try to get a hold of is logistics, really. Like, how much time do I have? Will I be able to offer my undivided attention, or do I have to multitask? Like, bringing up an important conversation during a sporting event may not be a good place to hold someone's attention. So logistics, how much time do I have? Do I have a hard out sound, whether it's in person versus something like Zoom? So just the venue, just the logistics, to make sure that it doesn't have a surprise ending. So someone says, I'd love to keep talking about this, but I gotta go. So you both have expectations of logistics around the length of the conversation, the venue, the attention, and so on. And also my expectations. If this does have a surprise ending, can we set up a time to continue? I may have an agenda that I let go of. It doesn't have to be exactly in the order that I want. I let go of. I try to think of content and not agenda. So those are things that come to my mind. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. I mean, nobody had brought up the question of logistics in the last conversation, but I think it's critical because that's kind of the context within which the conversation is taking place. And once you set up, it's like setting up the boundaries. It's like, this is the play area. Now you can do stuff within it, because if you don't have that, then it doesn't work. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Ron, followed by Laura. Ron.
Yes, for me, the first and most important idea that I carry with me when I enter into dialogue is to consciously leave all my theories, opinions, and beliefs at the door, and leave and just be open. That's the spirit that I have to start the dialogue with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ron. Laura, what does good conversation require of oneself? What does it require of you?
The conversations that I have most of the time deal with people coming to me with problems. And I don't necessarily know them very well. I kind of have to read what I know about people after, from my experiences and kind of figure out who they are, which is a gamble on my part. I'm taking a guess, but generally my guesses are pretty good. And what I have to do is the purpose of my end of the conversation is to kind of get what's going on inside their head that's all scrambled, to get it out and kind of talk about it and try and get some order to it and help them to see what they can control and what they have to work on. And then that starts to happen, there's participation and there's back and forth conversation and offering of ideas and so forth. So that's one kind of conversation that happens a lot for me. I tend to wind up being everybody's mother, basically, because these are all very much younger people or people that work for me, whatever. And then another conversation I have a very good friend who's a Jesuit priest, who's my sort of spiritual leader, minus religion, by the way. So it's kind of interesting. But we always have wonderful conversations. We have a lunch date. We had a standing lunch date in Rome every week, and that was our time to talk and just explore things. He wrote books about Paul, and he would talk to me about things. And I'd learn things about the church and ask questions and just explore things on his end. And he would ask me stuff about me. And he thinks he sort of takes care of me sometimes, over the shoulder. And so it's a kind of conversation mix. But Scott's been I'm somebody I miss, terribly in my life. But he's my conversationalist also. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Shireen, Kevin, and Joe. Shireen, what does a good conversation require from you?
Yeah, hi. I think I have a lot of talkative friends, and I don't talk to them often. So maybe 2 people once a week and the rest every month or 2. So I just find I feel shy when I haven't talked to someone for a while, and that means that I let them talk a lot and I feel shy. And then they talk a lot and I kind of ask them questions and I get really absorbed in their topic. And then at some point when there's a lull, I try to give my topics, and then typically they don't seem very interested. But I'm a very sensitive person, so it's probably that I'm overreading things. And yeah, so then when I'm comfortable with someone, I feel like I talk too much sometimes. And I have to monitor. So I'm always monitoring, am I talking too little? Because then I think it's boring for them if I don't say anything at all, or I just keep asking questions, like I'm interrogating them maybe, I don't know. So I'm trying to keep this balance, but then I feel shy. And then if I say my topic and they don't ask me anything or make any emotional thing, oh, really? Oh, that's too bad. And they just like ignore it and go back to their topic. Then I feel discouraged. I don't feel like talking anymore. So it seems a very difficult balance between me saying my thing and not being offended when they don't comment on my stuff. And yet they say a whole bunch of stuff nonstop. And then it's hard to break in because they're just not even pausing, not even breathing almost often. And so I don't want to be rude and interrupt, and they don't seem interested in what I say. So I don't know, I get a bit frustrated with this. I just would like people to be more absorbed in my topics instead of me listening always to that. I don't know, this is a struggle for me always. And then I think I should be more assertive and just talk. So this is interesting to hear your comments. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Shireen. I was talking to a friend of mine about this topic, and the point that she was making today is that she's saying there are people who are, the way she uses the words, she said, there are people who are more interrupty, and then there are people who are not so interrupty, and like you need to have different strategies for talking to them. And so there is a balance not only of who is talking what, but when you interrupt and when you don't interrupt, because you don't want to interrupt when you shouldn't interrupt, and you do want to interrupt when you should interrupt. So and that varies from person to person. So there are all kinds of these levels to conversations. Thank you, Shireen. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Joe. Kevin, what does good conversation require from you?
Yes, thank you, Shanka. It depends on the conversation, the topic, your friends or other people. It's like you said, some freestyle. Maybe you keep interpreting each other. You get excited about that. So learn each other. And for me, as a general, I would do a little bit of preparation before a phone call, video, or learn the topic and learn another side. You know, if you didn't talk with your friend for long, start from the last conversation, you know, how are they going till now, and do a ice break. And lastly, I would say leave some question. The questions brings conversation very easily.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Excellent. I could not agree more about questions. Next up is going to be Joe.
There's one comment that I just want to build upon is I thought that was really profound was Bruce's around logistics. You know, he mentioned some of the logistics of actually the physical space that you're in, but there's also the logistics of the relationship itself. You know, one of the things that you start to say is that what type of relationship do you have with this individual that you can actually have? What type of language, kind of conversation can you have? One of the, setting up the boundaries is kind of one of the first things that you do almost in solving any type of problem or addressing any kind of, issue, is that you start to say, okay, what's the point of where I'm working from? And, the conversation that you're going to have with an employee or the conversation you're going to have with a friend, these are different sets of boundaries. And I think the logistics point is, it wasn't something that had been raised, but I think it's profound. It's fundamental as far as what you bring to the conversation. You have to know the boundaries for which you can how you can communicate to this individual, a individual.
Wonderful. So there is another person, M, who has put a comment in the chat. It says, I think knowing what the other wishes to receive is a key aspect. Purely listening, idea/solution, suggesting or sharing, empathy, ? Also assessing if they welcome a bit of a push on a point we may disagree with, or if they are non-open type. Okay, wonderful. So now with that, let's go to the second. So we finished first question. That is, what does conversation require of you? Now we're going to go to the next question, which is going to be on what view do you need to have of the other person? What do you need to think of others for you to have a good conversation? If you want to have a good conversation, how do you need to see other people? What do you need to think about them? What is your view of other people for you to have good conversation? So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to answer that question. So Laura, would you like to answer that question? We're asking only, what view do you need to have of the other people? Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to share. Joe.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah. I feel like it's a little obnoxious for me to say this, but there are certainly a lot of people I run into that our educational levels are very different, our lives have been very different, our experiences have been very different. And I certainly can't engage in a conversation with them the same as I would engage with conversations with the people in this audience. And so I have to make a decision what I'll say and how I'll say it. If I want to talk about politics or the state of the world or, medicine or any of these big topics.
Let me clarify the question, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the greatest conversations you've had. What is it that you need to think of that person for you to have that conversation?
I think that person is intelligent, inspired, you know, has the ability to, you know, to have that kind of tete-a-tete and conversation to keep going, to be able to take it to a new dimension. So it's that sort of thing is what I would say I want the other person. And so I'm saying when for the most part, the people I meet, you know, on a daily basis that I potentially could have conversations with, I can't because they don't have those qualities.
Got it.
I don't have that kind of environment. I don't have that logistic in my life on a daily basis. This is the closest it comes to having that kind of conversation on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Joe, Isma, Bruce, and Ron. Joe, how do you need to think of other people in order to have a good conversation?
This comes back to something else that I'd mentioned previously, is this idea of respect. If you think back to the best conversations that you've had, and then this is why it's important to be respectful of everyone, is because some of them have been unexpected. You walk away thinking that was a really fantastic conversation with someone. But if you hadn't been respectful in the first place, where you were affording them the same level of paying attention, I'll just say, same degree of attention that you would to someone that you hold in high regard, then you may miss out on that. I'm not saying that every conversation, that if we have relationships with people, sometimes you're going to listen to other people more than not, it's just natural. But I think respect is perhaps one of the critical parts. I may come back, something else may come up for me.
Thank you. Next up is, I could not agree more. I think respect is the starting point. The next up is going to be Isma, Bruce, Ron, and Katie. Isma.
Hi, so what I need to work on is having faith that the other person is interested in what I'm saying, because for the most part, I have conversations where I just do most of the listening because I'm a good listener and I ask good questions, and usually it ends with them thanking me, saying like, wow, what a great conversation. And I'm just left kind of like unnourished. I mean, it's nourishing to help them, but over time, I've noticed it's given me this sense of feeling like I'm not really seen by people, and like people aren't capable of really listening, because I feel like when I do start talking, I sort of see the cues of them not listening. And so I just kind of hurry up and finish what I'm going to say and like don't even kind of bother. So yeah, I got to really work on the beliefs there that they aren't interested, or they're not capable of hearing what I say and ingesting it and stuff. So just having more faith in them as a good listener is what I have to work on.
Wonderful. Great point. See, I love all these points. I think there is an art to listening, but there is an art to speaking too. And you need both of them.
This is what this is. Nothing amazing.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Next up is going to be Bruce. Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I thought of things that have already been mentioned about respect.
No, you can go ahead and repeat. Good things need to be repeated many times.
Sure. What I tried to teach my kids is I love Einstein's view. He treated the president of the college and the janitor with the same level of respect. So I've always thought of that. And what I want to teach my kids is you can learn something from anybody. Anybody you meet is certainly going to have a wealth of experiences or viewpoints that you haven't had or don't know about, and you may not agree with them, but you should be open-minded to hearing their points of view and learn from it, learn from a different point of view. And even if you're angry with somebody, just still try to be open-minded. But I had a point, but I'm losing it now.
That's all right. Bruce, you can come back.
Yeah.
Whenever
Okay.
you have it, just go ahead and type exclamation mark and you can come
Thank
back.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Ron. Ron, go ahead.
Yes, so building on my first idea of entering the dialogue in a spirit of leaving all my ideas behind. The second thing, as far as the other person and other people have said this as well, is to have the attitude that the other person is truly worthy of my full attention.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. Next up is going to be, I want to read out what Michael wrote. The belief that everyone is my teacher. And from a spiritual perspective, that this person is my human family, brother, sister, working on the later belief personally. Okay, very good. Next up is going to be Katie.
Yeah, I agree on that last point that you can learn something from everyone. I think for me, when I know that I truly respect somebody, when I go up to somebody and I say like, well, what do you think of this situation? Or what do you think of this person? That's when I know that I truly, and I've had the pleasure of meeting people who work in Intel. So those are people that you can ask them, hey, like, what's your read on this person? And that's when I know I really respect that type of person, because I can take their perception and just tweak it a little bit for my own needs. And I'm like, that's it. That's what's happening right there. Mm-hmm. And I think a situation, maybe a different situation, maybe if I don't trust the perception, or like, maybe I shouldn't take that in. But I know when I'm like looking at a situation, I'm just editing and tweaking. That's where like the true respect is at, where if I can really say like, what are you thinking? I want your opinion on this.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. Let's go to Bruce. Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for, I did think of what I wanted to say, and it's a thought about vulnerability. Living in New York, it's, people call it having your subway face on. I would rather make the mistake of being the first one to remove my subway face and offer vulnerability and believe that the person I'm talking with will respond in kind. And so I would think of who I'm having a conversation with would hopefully respond in kind to vulnerability.
Yeah, I know. I live in New York too, and I routinely talk to people whom I think might be interesting. And what I've discovered, Bruce, is a very odd thing. Most people who look busy, they're actually pretending to be busy because they don't want to be bothered by other people. I find that it's 20% of the people are actually busy. 80% of them are trying to be busy so that they don't want people whom they don't like to talk to them. But if you can demonstrate very quickly that you're a person worth talking to, everybody is actually delighted to talk to you. That's what I've found.
Without realizing it, I go through the subway wearing these, and I'm listening to absolutely nothing. and yeah. People, I can tell people are hesitant to come up to talk to me and say, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. And I say, well, I'm not listening to anything, so you're not interrupting.
So I assume nobody is listening to anything, and anything that they're listening to is not that important to them. It is, and that's actually true most of the time. Sometimes it is 20/80, but that's what. Next up is going to be David. David, go ahead.
Yes, I guess what I wanted to bring up was Carl Rogers and the unconditional positive regard. I guess it's a matter of how I think of people is that I want people to whom I can express that unconditional positive regard, because it's very helpful. As Carl Rogers, psychologist, has said, for a useful conversation, if you want it to be productive, to bring that attitude and also to have that expectation in the other person that it's worthwhile to be supportive of them and accepting of them.
Wonderful. Excellent point. The point about authentic relating is a very, very deep point. So Carl Rogers is, I definitely recommend Carl Rogers on this topic. It's very deep and very profound. Next up is going to be Shireen, followed by Laura. Shireen.
Yeah, I just find, in my opinion, that I find that younger people have more curiosity about the world. I find I just talk to older people. I'm 54, so I talk to older people, and I feel like the curiosity has been deleted from them, kind of. Like I ask them, what do you think? Have you found that? Because I want to hear what they say, but they never, like really never, like my friends never ask me, what do you think? Like they really never do, which surprises me. And they don't really ask questions ever. So to me, it indicates kind of a lack of curiosity about another person. Or even my topics, they never ask me questions.
Wonderful.
And I think that they don't sometimes address the topic that I'm kind of talking about. I know that you would have a similar topic, but sometimes it just feels like that's not even what I'm talking about. Like, how did he even get there? So maybe, yeah, I don't know. I just find that sometimes it's like, I don't know why you're talking about that. And then I feel like sometimes there's not much an emotional connection. Like, I don't know, like it feels very impersonal. Like I'm talking to a friend, but somehow it feels like I'm talking to a stranger because I don't know, it just has this impersonal feel, but but I've known you a long time, but there's not like affection or something in some cases. And it just feels lacking. And I feel like I've talked to someone in a meetup room that I don't know. And even sometimes in a meetup room, I have more of a connection emotionally, or like someone in a park than a friend sometimes. And I think also the superficial topic thing, like, I just feel like I introduce a topic and everything becomes superficial. Like we're talking about the weather and sports and travel and whatever, and I talk about something deeper. And then somehow it goes up to the superficial and I get frustrated because I'd rather talk about something on a deeper level because it's more meaningful to me, but I don't feel that's happening. And then I feel there's also a lack of empathy because, maybe I tell a problem or something and then people want to give advice and then change the subject or they ignore it because they don't feel comfortable, I think. And I really would just like some comforting words. I'm sorry you had that problem. I hope it gets better. I'm here for you, something like that. And I try to offer that to them because I'm often supporting them or listening to them. Like Isma, like I'm totally with Isma's comments. Like I feel that too. I'm often listening and they're like, you're a good listener. And I feel there's like a lot of stuff lacking. So I'm a highly sensitive person. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but maybe that's why. Anyway, I've talked enough. That's it. Thank you.
That's very good. And both for you and Isma, I would recommend our next answer coming up on how to speak, and maybe we can pick up, see, all of us have different things that we need to learn. There are a lot of people who need to learn actually listening. Okay. So there is a tremendous value to people who can listen, but there is a value to people who can speak, that it generates value for you, it generates value for other people. And I look forward to talking. And actually in the conversation that we did last time, people focused almost 80% on listening and only 20% on speaking. So that's why I brought that question in this time. So I would love to hear what everybody has to say about that. Laura, did you have any final points about how you should view other people so that your conversations with them are as good as possible?
Well, I was going to throw in on sort of a logistic kind of thing and a way that I like to use conversation, and it may be short conversations, but it's about building community, getting people to talk again, getting people to just be like we used to be on the subway, chit chat, with one another rather than sitting with buds in the ear. So when I'd be sitting on the subway and somebody come in front of me, I'd say, okay, take that out of your ear and put that in your pocket. I have a rule that says if you stand in front of me on the subway, we have to talk. And so we get into these conversations for like 15 minutes, intense laughing this, and these guys would like, oh, I got to get off. I'm so sorry. That was great. I really loved it. Thank you so much. Every single time, no matter what age, and especially the millennial guys really liked it because with those, I could talk about, you got to get out and vote. You got to do this, and that. And I am generally very shy, but somehow, sometime in my late age, I decided to be as brazen as I want to, and I'll do whatever I want to, contrary to my daughter, who says, why do you talk to so many people? They're not interested, but she's wrong. They are. And it's been wonderful. And I do it on the street and I do it in the subway. And it's really amazing to find out more and more people are getting tired of this, ear thing and not talking to one another and texting. And I think there's going to be a revolution not too far down the road because people are sick of it and they want to be people to people again. So there. And that's what I have to say about this thing. I don't know if it exactly fits in, but a conversation of any type is really important. And we have to go back to having it at all kinds of levels. And you got to start with the short stuff. And the other way, you have to be able to get into conversation. So you have to be able to look at somebody and figure out, what can I say to this person that I can have an icebreaker? So I'll look at somebody on the train and say, okay, what is it? Their shoes, the way that, what are they reading? What they're, and I find something that makes it work. And before you know it, we're in a conversation, and it's really easy. And nobody's turned their head away and not wanted to talk. And it's really, it says something about what's going on. And I feel like a crusader on that sometimes, but it's okay. It's who I am.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Laura. Great, great comments. Okay, I have to tell you guys a story, okay, on this point. I actually do talk to anybody whom I think is interesting, wherever I am. Okay, and I want to give you a story. I've told it to a couple of people here, but I want to tell this to everybody, just to give you a kind of example of extreme example. I was in Kuwait. Now, Kuwait is a grim place. Okay, you don't want to do anything that you shouldn't be doing, and you have to be very careful. So I was at the Kuwaiti airport, and I was waiting for my plane, and it was like a 1 hour wait. And there was this young Kuwaiti gentleman sitting across from me, wearing the full tob, the full garb. And so I said, okay, look, I don't want to just sit, I will talk. And I've not interacted that many, I've not interacted with that many Kuwaitis before. So it's always interesting. So I asked him, what do you do? So he says, I'm a speech therapist. Now, sometimes I like to make things interesting. So I asked him, why? He was a little bit taken aback by that. But he recovered in about 3 seconds. And he says, because I'm interested in accents. So I asked him, what do you mean? So he said, let me show you. So he holds out his arms like this. I'm going to hold it like this, but it's actually, he was holding out, his arms completely wide like that. And he says, give me 2 accents. So I say, American and Indian. So now imagine, he's been talking in the Kuwaiti accent so far. So he suddenly starts talking in American accent, perfect American accent, and starts to move his hand towards his other hand, adding a little bit of Indian accent, more Indian accent, more Indian, talking throughout, full Indian accent, indistinguishable from an Indian person, starts moving his hand back, adds more American, perfect American, puts his hands down. And I said, wow, that's incredible. I've never seen anything like that. Okay. Now, UK and Chinese. He says, no problem. Starts to talk in perfect British accent. Moves his hands like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. More Chinese, full Chinese. And back. So then I said, this is incredible. This is unheard of. I've never seen anything like this. Okay. Now Chinese and Indian. So he looks at me and he says, can't be done. So I said, what do you mean can't be done? He says, do you think I'm making up this thing? No. Lots of Indians go to America. I have studied how their accents change over time. Not that many, but quite a few Chinese go to the UK, and I've seen how their accents change. And nobody from China goes to India. Nobody from India goes to China. So I don't know what it sounds like. And besides, I do consulting for American firms who want to have their customer service in India, or UK firms who want to have their customer service in India or China. So I know, and I have to map them out. I have to say, you're over here. In order to get here, this is what you need to do. And that's why I have all of these calibrated properly. So Now this is not something I would have expected in Kuwait from a person I'm just saying hi to. So there can be just surprises of incredible kind. But this is my most interesting encounter of just talking randomly to people. Okay, now I want to also summarize for you what everybody said about these two questions in the previous meetup. I have abstracted out people's answers to this very question of what does it require from you and what does it require from other people. So what people said last time was it requires that you be open, committed to learning, curious, willing to change. You have to be humble. You have to be organized. You have to have a purpose. You have to plan it out. You have to be articulate and clear. You have to be authentic. You have to be on the premise of noticing something new that you have never noticed before. You have to have a good character and virtue, and you have to have values you care for yourself. And most of all, you have to be self-aware during the conversation. This is what they said about what you need to be in order to have a good conversation. What approach do you need towards other people? You need to have genuine interest in people. You need to have respect. More than that, you need to accept them. You have to say they are what they are. That's the starting point. Not who you are, not whom you want them to be. They are what they are. You have to respect the fact that they have different contexts. You have to accept those differences. You have to value others, and you have to have compassion. That's what people said last time. Now, we're doing very well on time. We are about halfway. Now, the next three questions remaining, we've talked about what it requires from you, attitude you need to have towards other people. Now, we're going to talk about, how do you listen? After that, we're going to talk about how do you speak? And then what new things you learned in today's meetup and the last meetup. All right, so we're going to start. The question on the table now is how do you listen? What are the principles of listening? What does it take to be a good listener? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to speak. You're welcome to listen, but if you could speak about that, I'd appreciate that. We'll start with Joe.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is trying to listen to the types of words that people are using, and to get a context of where they're coming from, whether it's through their mood. They might be using a certain type of language because they're unhappy about something, or that might be because this is their perspective. So I think you're starting to gauge where the person is in general. And then I think that you start to have a context either from the person's past perspectives or where their current mood is. The other is that as far as listening is, I think it's as much internally as it is as well as it is kind of taking in the information. It's kind of, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, being aware of the thoughts that come up in your, that are coming up for you as somebody is saying something, so that you can kind of negate the bias that you may have that about a particular statement that someone's making. Kind of also kind of look at where, some of your kind of trying to determine if something is coming up from your past experiences, there are certain things that I will react to based on my past experiences. And I need to be aware of that. I think it's also listening to the tone of the individual as well. If their tone is changing, that tells you something. If they're getting upset or if they're getting angry or things along those lines. I think these are all, and then you need to kind of, and this comes back to something that, again, I think is going to be one of my major takeaways is what Bruce mentioned, is with the logistics, you start to understand the boundaries of the conversation itself. So those are just some things I think go into to listening as well. I think it's as much an internal listening to yourself as it is as much bringing the information in. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Evanik, Bruce, and Marco. Evanik.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is being open to the other person who's speaking to you. And, I think we've said this before, but like, really respecting who that person is and saying to yourself, everybody brings something to the table. And everybody, like, if it's just their experience, right? They can bring their experience to it and you can learn from their experience. Being respectful, I think and be curious, like really figure out not only, in what they're saying, but if you notice that you are losing interest in the conversation, ask yourself, why am I losing interest in a conversation? Really like do a check-in with yourself and say, why am I losing concentration right now? Why am I not listening? I think asking questions is key. When somebody says something and you don't understand, just don't keep listening, because that could go along that vein. So if you ask questions about something you don't understand or something you want to know more about, and then like Joe said, past experiences, I think that's true, because you may not be reacting to that person. You're reacting to a situation that maybe it triggered in your brain and it brought in the past experiences. Now your brain is trying to protect you from it. So now you're on defensive rather than listening. And then something else Joe was saying was about the tone. But I would say, if you're detecting like a tone, like if you're talking and all of a sudden you notice that that person's tone changes, like they're getting upset or they're getting angry, stop and ask, hey, did I say something that offended you? Did I say something that upset you? I was like, I'm detecting that you're upset right now. Are you upset? Can you tell me why you're upset? Like, that's part of it. And I think along those veins is be honest in the conversation. I think a lot of times we want to impress somebody when we're talking to them and we want to pretend like we're understanding them, or, be honest. And, even if you're going to say, you know what, I don't want to talk about this anymore, be honest about that. And really, be honest with the other person, because they deserve that. If they're having a conversation with you and you really are not interested in the conversation, or you're wanting to end the conversation, you can say it in a respectful way, but say, I'm not really interested anymore, or I don't want to talk about this anymore. Can we end the conversation? So those are my thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is going to be Bruce, Marco, Laura, and Joe. Bruce.
Yes, hi, thank you. Listening. I think it's important to listen with your eyes. I think it's important to listen with your body language. When I listen to somebody, I look them in the eye. It's one thing to, when you're listening, if you're listening with your leaning back and your arms folded, I mean, it sends a clear signal. If you're listening and you're leaning forward in your chair, it sends another signal. It's important for me that they know that I'm listening, and giving them the attention. What they're saying is important to me, and so I'm careful about the body language that signals that I send, so that they know they're being listened to. I had a long time ago, I went rock climbing for the first time, and we're driving towards the cliff, and I'm seeing tiny little specks up there. And I said to our guide, you know, how many years do you have to climb before you climb something like that? And he goes, well, we're doing that this morning. And I'm going, ah. And so we get to the bottom of the cliff, and he's telling us how the equipment works, what kind of knots to use, what order we're going to go in, what verbal commands we're going to use to communicate. And he would just stop talking. If someone wasn't giving him their eyes, he would just stop talking. He wouldn't say, hey, pay attention. He would just stop talking. And I was looking around at nature because I was just so overwhelmed. I live in Manhattan, and he'd wait till I looked at him, and then he'd continue talking. So my life depends on it. And but anyway, I try to listen with my eyes and be careful about my body language to let them know that I am listening.
Wonderful. Great points. You know, our visual cortex are humongous part of our brain, and that's a very large part of the communication. So I really like the point about actually looking at people and letting them know with the body language that you are actually listening. So excellent. Thank you. Next up is Marco. Marco.
Definitely like being empathic, and putting yourself in like others' shoes. And also like expect surprises, like, you know, not going in with like an agenda, and not focusing so much on what you have to say. You know, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Laura, how do you listen well? What does it take for you to listen well?
Well, I think everything that people have been talking about, like, you know, clear my head, put my full attention, focus at all times, especially for me who has very little short-term memory. And if I want to remember what was discussed, I have to pay lots of attention. I have to be able to repeat it in my head a lot of times, and sometimes I'll lose it, that, you know, but I know sometime it'll come back again. So I think all that's really important in terms of what it should be doing as a good listener. But also I can also say what I do as a terrible listener, because at times when, especially with my daughter, we'll have a conversation and, you know, she's talking about something I already know what she's going to say, and I can preempt it, and I start to preempt it because I want to get beyond that point. I want to rush along, and boy, that's a really bad thing to do. And I have to really watch it. But I get impatient, you know, because and she says, you don't know because you haven't been in school, you haven't studied this in 30 years. You know, education's like not made much progress in the last 30 years. So I mean, I know what she's going to say. So never do that, you know, learn not to do that. And from the other side of it, as we well know, I tend to be stream of consciousness speaker, and
we'll come to speaking soon.
Yeah, but yeah, also as a listener, if you find yourself listening to somebody who speaks like that, you've got to tell them time out so that you can't, because you can't listen to somebody who speaks like that. So you've got to make them stop and make sentences along the way so that you get some coherence. So I think that's very important in terms of being in a conversation, that, you know, there's rules about, you know, how long a sentence should be. You know, it's got to be a digestible amount of words.
Wonderful. I like that point very much. You know, Avanique made a similar point that if you don't understand what is being said, give feedback. You know, that's part of listening. You know, it's like it's not just listening is not just a passive kind of letting words fall on you, but you're actually trying to grasp what the other person is saying. And most people who are really trying to communicate will appreciate that, saying, oh, I did not understand that, you know, or, you know, what does that mean? I don't get that. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Next up is going to be Shireen, Isma, and Joe. Shireen.
Yes, you know, I taught ESL, English as a second language, for 25 years. So I had a lot of people speaking broken English. So yeah, I agree with Laura. Yeah, like patience. I was so bored sometimes, but I just had to really focus. And it doesn't have to be native speakers or like immigrants. Like it just, yeah, I think you need a lot of patience because sometimes the topics are kind of boring, but like I just try to find the basic points, and sometimes I don't understand it. So even if you don't understand, I just try to learn something new and be empathetic, like someone said, like put myself in their shoes and try to understand a different viewpoint. And I think, yeah, like you can also paraphrase things. So if someone says blah, 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 and you like kind of repeat it, but in a maybe summarized form or take the gist of it. And then they can correct you if you have the wrong idea. And then like, because sometimes it's confusing, like maybe you don't understand them. So you kind of paraphrase it and then it sort of clarifies it in your mind and also makes them feel better, I think, because it shows that you're actively listening and trying to interpret it in your own words. So I think that's also, I don't know, maybe a bit confirming, like affirming to them. And, you can also just, say, oh, really? Oh, yeah. Or that's too bad. Or that's great. Or like some reaction. Because I find a lot of people, they listen to me, but I don't know if they're listening to me because they don't react and they don't say, that's great. That's too bad. Oh, really? There's like no anything at all. And they, like my friend today, I talked for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes in silence. And then she says about something else. Like, I don't even know if she was listening. So it's nice to get confirmation that people are having an emotional connection to you or an intellectual connection, that they're paying attention, like just to affirm that they're paying attention, and they're not looking at their clock or their cell phone or whatever it is. And then like not to give advice, I think, well, that's more speaking, I guess, but like, yeah, not like sort of preparing your own answer ahead of time. Because, you have some friends and, you say something and then 20 minutes later, they'll ask you the same question that you just talked about. And you're like, well, you're not even listening to me because I just said this. And then, but you don't say that because that would be rude. So, you know what I mean? So it would be nice if you can focus and not be thinking of this, that, and that, and what you're going to say, and like just absorb it and then pause. And then, when it's finished, then sort of say your comment, Yeah, so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. This point, I want to emphasize one point, which in the last meetup, Joe, Jeff, and I also emphasized. This is the point about repeating back to people what you understand them as saying. Because many times what happens is that if you just go, or if you say yes, many times you do not actually understand what the other person is saying because the contexts are different. And so it's always a good idea to, especially if things are complex, that you say, okay, let me try to put it in my own words and then say it back to them in your own words, in your own way of thinking. And then they can say, oh yes, that's correct. Or not quite, it's like this. And all of that is really, really huge way, because you're telling them that not only that it's words are falling on your ear, but you are processing it. You're putting it in your own words and you're telling them that this is what I understand. And I want to make sure I understand you clearly. So that's, I think, very, very powerful. Thank you. Next up is Isma, Joe, Katie, and Chris. Isma.
Hi. So yeah, I just want to, a lot of really good points about how to be a good listener. And I just want to add to focus on what the person is feeling first before you try to advise them or give your input or give your perspective. Because if you haven't acknowledged how they're feeling, they're not going to listen to you back and you're just not listening. I think that 99% of the time, people aren't looking for advice when they come to you to talk. They're just looking for someone to be like, I see you're really upset. Yeah, I can see you're really upset because your need for whatever isn't getting met. And then after a while of just feeling seen, they're able to feel like they have space to then get into it with you and break down their problem. And I just want to do a plug for Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, which is called NVC. And if you haven't learned this, I think it's invaluable in conversation because he teaches you how to recognize, how to acknowledge and empathically listen, acknowledge when someone is feeling something, state their feeling, and then address what need of theirs is or isn't getting met by what they're what they've been experiencing. So my point is to come out of the clouds and just get grounded and sense into what are they feeling? How do they need to be seen right now? And you can test it out for yourself. Like if you go to someone and you're frustrated with something, you're not going to feel good by the end of the conversation unless they say, yeah, that sounds shitty. That sounds like really tough. You know, man, that's really hard. You're just going to feel totally frustrated, no matter if they gave you the right advice. That doesn't matter, you know, because if you don't feel like acknowledged and seen, you're just going to not feel listened to, period.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Isma. Next up is Joe, Katie, and Chris.
I'll be very brief because it's repeating something that Laura had said, and I had actually had written it down prior, is this idea of don't make assumptions about what someone's going to say. And you know, that say, oh, that person always says that, or, you know, and jump to, you know, essentially some type of conclusion early because just because, you know, they may have said something in the past. So I guess that's a way of making sure your bias doesn't override your ability to actually hear the person and what they're saying. But I think Laura's example with her daughter is actually a perfect example of that, especially if you're in the same industry and you're listening to someone, that it's very easy to say, I know where this person's going. And you at least have to catch yourself. You may actually know where the person is going, but you know, at the same time, that doesn't mean that you don't show a certain amount of patience and allow them to get to where the point that they were trying to make in the first place. So I guess there's another aspect of that is patience. So patience and bias and things like that kind of are incorporated to exactly what she was saying.
Thank you. Next up is Katie, followed by Chris. Katie.
So I'm going to be commenting on what Isma said first and then comment back to something that Marco said. I agree with Isma. First, you're connecting to how they're experiencing it, and you're kind of like just connecting literally just to their perception and kind of letting go of like the facts. I catch myself sometimes going like, oh, but the facts don't support that. And I have to remind myself like, no, connect to how they're seeing it first. And that's why I think some people criticize NBC because people kind of use it for validation. That's where even Marshall Rosenberg said, like, it's like he's like, oh, people are using it like a narcotic because they're just using it for people to.
Katie.
I'm back, sorry. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think my internet cut out.
Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that's where people could so I remember reading a Harvard Business Review article that also, if you're looking, and this is speaking to Marco's comment, that if you're looking just for validation, which is kind of like the comment about empathy, just wanting empathy, maybe conversation is not what you're looking for. Because if you just want somebody to validate your perceptions and how you're feeling, you know, you can kind of give a lot of that to yourself if you're just looking for the understanding of feelings, because you already know how yourself is feeling if you're not open to feedback or any, you know, facts or bringing in other perspectives. So that's, I see it as both positive and kind of negative.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Chris.
Yeah, as part of my point has been like echoed by, you know, a few people in parts, I think. So I'll be brief also. I think it's really difficult when someone approaches you and starts talking to you, that you have to really slow down and figure out what is their intention before anything, right? So because I think I can kind of group that into like, you know, approximately 4 groups, right? So some people, you know, they want you to give them a solution, right? This is what we always assume, or your opinion. Some people may just want you to listen with no response. Somebody may not, having your understanding may not be enough, right? This is more closer to your family and spouse and close friends. They actually want a particular concrete response. And then the fourth group is kind of unpredictable. It's more like they may actually, want a more like developmental intellectual discourse. So figure that out actually is kind of important, and it takes a lot of practice, for this kind of engagement to figure out exactly what they want. And then I think a lot of things that I think Isma talk about, and other people talk about not making assumptions and have the patience really comes into play. But I figured for me, that's actually been the most difficult part, even after many years, is figure out between this approximately 4 groups. A lot of times is quite challenging, especially sometimes between. I mean, this is for me personally, between sexes. Like so if I'm talking to a guy, it's a little bit easier because we have kind of similar approach to the conversation. I can say, oh, okay, this is what he wants here, right? But was the other sex, it's a little tougher because sometimes the part that where they just want to listen without offering anything versus a comforting response versus a solution, the line's incredibly subtle, and we can easily trample it. And I have done it many times. And I actually haven't. So if people have advice on that, I'd like to hear that, because for me, it's kind of like, I don't know. After all this year, I developed what I can say a foolproof way of exactly noticing what that line is, because it really depends on the individual that I'm talking to, and they can depend on the circumstances. I don't know. It's like I can really say to this stage, the foolproof way is like, oh, okay, she demonstrated these like specific, features in this conversation, therefore she's this. So if somebody have like some kind of feedback on that, that'd be really great.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know whether it's human beings are very complex, and there is so much individual variation. So I think you're on the it's like saying that there are these 4 things, and just to figure out what's going on, and that keeps changing during a conversation many times as well. So excellent points. Thank you. Next up is Mike. Mike, what principles do you use to listen really well?
There's 2 of the names that got mentioned, Marshall Rosenberg and Jordan Peterson, appeared at a corporate event about 2 years ago, for which they got paid $125,000 for 4 hours work. Now, they came to the conclusion that Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning is what you're trying to communicate, not just English words, which aren't that good. And I've talked about in another context that when 2 AI computers are trying to talk to each other, they don't use English words. They invent their own language, which is kind of a network database. How do
you listen well, Mike?
Okay, well, I'm getting there. You want to hear the whole story, or you want
just your insights about how do you listen well?
I don't. You know me well enough to know I don't have any insights. I listen to other people.
I will ask you. I'll come to you on how to speak well. Okay, maybe you have insights there.
Maybe you can tell me a little bit about how to speak well. But let me finish the thought.
Just very quickly, Mike.
The database that you have is pretty complicated about an idea. Object-oriented databases are a special case of network databases.
Mike, we
Well,
can't go off topic like that. We have to
Okay.
listen.
Hey, are you listening well? Listen well for a few minutes, and then I'll
Can't
listen.
do that, Mike. Can't do that. We are going to run out of time.
All right, I'm just going to say you need to transmit that network database. Now, you after a few words, you got a pretty good idea. Laura said when she talks to her daughter, she interrupts and says, "Okay, I know what you've been there 1,000 times. Stop." But that doesn't. But you need to do that iterative. You either can download the whole database, or you can do little pieces of it and iteratively OODA loop mode refine it until the error terms are near zero. So you got the network database, which represents your idea. The flawed version is in the person you're communicating. While you're transmitting, you may change your, after going through this dialogue, you may change what's your view of Jordan Peterson's network database is. The network database is Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning. And eventually, despite Plato saying the map is not the territory, eventually the map converges to the territory. Now, Plato also said the map is usually wrong, but it's still useful. So converging, when you have that dialogue with somebody, you're converging to that map. And two AIs talking to each other similarly converge to that map.
All right, Mike, we can't do this. Let me try to summarize. Okay, see, maps of meaning is a very powerful idea. What it is saying is that you have to understand where people are and where they're going. And you have to do this, like it's basically two maps. You are where you are, and that's where you're going. And then the other person is where they are, and that's where they're going. It's not enough to know where they are. It's important to know where they're going. And that is true as a person, and it is true in a conversation. So being aware of that, of saying, okay, this is what the intention is. So this is what they are feeling, and this is where they are trying to go. So you're trying to help them on both those things, and those are relevant in that. So that's how I can connect what Mike is saying. All right, let's go to the next one.
Can I add one more point?
30 seconds, please.
30 seconds. To get this converged, you need to look at how Marshall Rosenberg converged on his idea of what his NVC maps are with Jordan Peterson's, his idea of what
let's do that. Mike, do one thing. Go ahead and put a link to that video so people can see it for themselves. Next question is going to be, folks, we have to keep on topic because we're trying to go through the entire, all our ideas about good conversation. And if we go on tangents, then we lose our ability to bring everything together. That's why we need to keep on topic. So the next topic, so we have covered 3 topics so far, 3 questions. The next 2 questions, the next one is going to be, how do you speak well? What is speaking well? And then finally, the question is, what is it that you're walking away with from this meetup and the previous meetup? What is it? What new insights? I'm only interested in new things that you're not thought of before. I want to see what people have picked up from these meetups. So the question now is, what are the principles of speaking? How do you speak well? We're going to start with Joe, followed by David. Joe.
I think one of the principles is that you stay close to facts. I mean, I don't want to stay exclusively, but you do want to speak about facts. And because that, that's the foundation of your understanding, where you're starting to you're not necessarily offering an opinion and just speaking and going off on tangents. It kind of serves as a control to make sure that you're actually staying on topic. The other part is that when you're speaking is to not jump to conclusions. As you know, that's as much as listening, but you know, when you're speaking, don't try, you know, don't interrupt, don't, and you know, don't make a conclusion, you know, make a conclusions kind of statement to someone where you're starting to direct the conversation. I think that that's an important part too. And you kind of just touched on it a little bit, is this, where is it going? And you don't want to necessarily derail the conversation and send it in a direction that that it doesn't need to go, because then you're not necessarily getting the information from the other individual. We have a tendency sometimes to direct conversations. And I think that does us a disservice, because we already know what we know. So I think that just showing a degree of restraint in that particular area is really important. I think the other part is just knowing what needs to be expressed at a particular moment in time as well. Timing is really important. That's the basis of speaking, is like, what should I express at this point in time? And I think if you are able to do that effectively, then you're able to pretty much maximize the potential that you're going to get, or whatever potential there is out of the conversation itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is David, Bruce, and Laura. David.
Yeah, sure, I think I'm going to contradict Joe a little bit here, in the sense that one way to approach this is what we discussed a few years ago with Robert Cialdini of persuasion and persuasion. Specifically, there are certain types of activities of similarities, complements, things to set up the conversation to have it be more effective if one is trying to accomplish something in the conversation. Again, this is partly a question of what the conversation actually means, whether this is truly just a dialogue, learning, whether again you're trying to persuade someone, trying to take some action, selling something. But there definitely are certain types of, as Jillian was described, activities, specific things that trigger people to be able to have if one wants to, I mean, maybe it's abusing the word, but manipulate people or manipulate the conversation. There are certain things that can be done to establish a rapport or establish it. I mean, you may like the person who want it anyways, but just be aware of those actions and those activities and how they influence the other people. And that's to when you're speaking, not just the effect you're going to have, but if you want to assertively have an effect on somebody.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Bruce, followed by Laura. Bruce.
Yep. Thank you. Being an effective speaker, I think comes to mind is purpose, pace, and pause. And being a good speaker, in this meetup, we're talking about dialogues, not monologues, not speaking in front of an audience, but I'm thinking as far as dialogues go, it's a give and take, ebb and flow. I don't think of it as a dance, because somebody is the lead for the entire dance. Conversations, dialogues, I think, is more of a taking turns leading. There's the macro sense of the conversation as a whole. What's your purpose as the dialogue as a whole? And then when it's your turn to talk, just for the moment, what's your purpose for that moment? What's your purpose? What's your pace? Talking too slowly is just as bad as talking too fast. And knowing to pause.
Wonderful. Beautifully put. Thank you. Laura, how do you need to speak in order to engage in a good dialogue? How do you need to speak?
How do you need to speak? Well, I think you need to determine an appropriate topic, appropriate level, appropriate extent. That was a topic that you and you have to have appropriate expectations for the outcome. That's what I think you have to go in with. And I think it's true even with a dialogue, I think is more relaxed, of course. And so I think but you still have to have these things in your dialogue. You have to keep control at all times if you want it to work. You can't, you have to keep control of your side of the conversation. And if you see it going wild, you got to be able to know how to call it back in. That's all. And one thing I think we don't ever talk about is the role of humor in conversation as a part of making conversation happen. And I think that's really important. And I know I use humor all the time. I think humor is a really important element in life in general. But I do. I'm funny, let's face it, and I use it. But no, it really works in many ways. But in any case, I do think it's important. And you know, and I think also conversation should be used to be paid forward. You know, we had a good conversation. We came out with this outcome. We understand something different about the world. Go talk to somebody else about it. Make it go forward. Make it build. It's not enough just to have a conversation between you and me. We've got to make it grow bigger, better all the time. So that has to be part of the outcome that we want.
Wonderful.
That's what I have to say.
Thank
I'm
you.
done.
Thank you, Laura.
I'm done.
Next up is going to be Shireen. Shireen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of people talk a lot, and maybe people can monitor, like, are they talking too much and giving the other person a chance to talk? I also find men and women have different themes. I find with men, I have to focus on keeping things rational and factual and about the news and not about relationships. I find men aren't typically interested in relationships and emotional topics, and women prefer to talk about their family and relationships and work and their work relationship. They're more like emotional. So I have to try to focus on which sex I'm talking to. And also, yeah, someone said like to say things that are relevant and interesting to the other person and not bore them by looking at them and seeing how they react. And if they appear bored or restless or angry or what, and then adjust your conversation. Also superficial or deep, like some people want superficial, some want deep, some want a combination. So you have to know their personality, or even a stranger, get a sense of, where they're at. Also, if they're narcissistic, then they'll want you to listen to them constantly without saying anything about yourself. If they're very shy, then you end up talking a lot. To try to figure out what they want and get a balance and give them what they want. Otherwise they won't call you back again, and they don't want to see you. So give them what they want, like a salesperson. Also, and pause, because a lot of people don't pause. And then in my case, I feel like it's rude to interrupt them because they just don't even breathe almost sometimes. And like, don't offend them, and just monitor in your head what the results will be when you say this thing. Because I feel like often people just say things without thinking about the consequences. And to be polite and don't be pessimistic. I find when I'm very pessimistic, people don't enjoy the conversation, and then like they don't want to meet me again. So I'm trying to not be overly pessimistic and keep everything kind of light in a sense, even though you talk about a problem, like don't dwell on it, just like change the subject. Don't be too, I don't know, like too monotonous and too extreme in one way or the other. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Shireen. Next up is going to be Chris, followed by Ron. Chris.
Yeah, so I probably just follow what Shireen said. And the thing I think about too is that actually the way to make a conversation, especially if it's an icebreaker situation, has nothing to do with speaking. So these are what I call nonverbal things are really important, right? Before you can actually make a good conversation. So you want to make good, eye contact without staring person, to the desk, right? You want to smile, you want to keep your hands open and not, and not like cross your arms. So you just want to present a fairly open and friendly posture without being like super like, like squeezious, right? So like, and the person can actually say, okay, this is an open, nice person that I can have a conversation. And then now you got about 5 to 10 seconds to pick up the nonverbal cue of the other person. Like, okay, does this person even want to talk to me? Is this person right now have the energy and emotional will to want to talk, right? Now, if the answer is yes, then you can start to talk. But I think many times, I would say over half the time, why people fail on the eventual conversation is because they have already failed these non-verbal cues beforehand, and then they went to the conversation, and they only discover like 10 minutes later that the person they're having a conversation with really did not want to have this conversation, and they could have both saved like 10 minutes. So I think that will be pretty important. And then, yeah, I kind of agree with what like Shireen said, like, you know, once you get into it, all of these things start to apply. But I think the good listening thing really serves us in good steads, because the more you listen and really understood what the other person feels and wants, the better you can kind of tone your conversation to that person. And then the one thing I'll add is culturally. So I'm of like, you know, more on the Asian background. I'll just say that I found it's kind of funny because it, you know, like sometimes in the more American culture, if there's this kind of what I call uncomfortable silence, right? People feel the need to fill in the uncomfortable silence. Where in Asian background, you actually don't have this need. You feel like, okay, you know, we had a conversation and we came to a topic that's, you know, and we have nothing more to say on this particular thing. Give us ourselves like a 10 seconds break. We can go talk about something else. Versus what we need to work for every single second. Like, no, we don't need to work for every single second. So so I would just say, if you meet someone with more of like a Asian or Middle Eastern background, then this rule definitely applies. You do not have the need to continue to talk every second.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. All right. So the question is, how do you speak? What are the principles of effective speaking? Ron, Evanique, and Laura.
So what came to mind here is to speak to what the person said. And an example of when it can be frustrating is when people have an agenda for a conversation, and instead of the conversation taking a natural course, it is continually cut and chopped into little bits and pieces because the agenda demands it. So I think there is something to be explored there, but I won't go on, but I think there's something awry when responding to the other person is continuously chopped up and cut off. It doesn't allow speech to flow naturally. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, I think being authentic is key to how to speak. And I think that's something, like, we can use all these tools and you know, we can improve, but I think being authentic and you know, conversating naturally, you know, I think going back to the listening piece a little bit, when you're listening to a person and you're respecting who they are, then you can respond authentically, and you know, the how will come, and then you'll learn. Like, being able to learn, you know, sometimes it just takes experience. You know, you're just going to have the conversation, be authentic, ask questions, notice. I think part of how to speak is noticing what's going on with the other person and responding in an authentic way, and you know, just really, you know, being curious. But I think the how will come, but be authentic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Laura, how do you speak?
The Italians have a saying, which is speak like you eat, you know, which means it's keep it simple. Not to use, be attentive of your vocabulary, depending upon who you're speaking to, terminology. I mean, because you may be engaging in a conversation which involves kind of new concepts for somebody, and you want to make sure that they're understanding the words that you're using. You can't assume that they'll know those words. So that kind of thing I think is important, basically. And again, like Ebony is saying, be authentic, don't try and be pretentious about things. Make it an enjoyable experience to have a conversation with the person. Walk away with you both feeling like, that was great, I really enjoyed speaking with you and I want to speak again and let's keep talking, and maybe invite other people, make this thing a good experience. There's nothing worse than when somebody gets up with all their pretentiousness and I'm this person and I got a PhD and I'm really smart and because you get a lot of that and it's a really unpleasant kind of experience listening to those folks. So I agree with all of that, and just to be considerate of the the people that you're speaking to. I mean, I don't want to mean anything that I disrespect the people that I meet, that I speak to, that that they're a different level. I respect everybody and I believe we're all equal in it. But at the same time, I'll speak maybe a little bit differently with them because I know that they don't know their vocabulary. I know what their vocabulary is, and I'm not going to use words to speak to them where they're not going to understand it.
Wonderful.
So that's the kind of thing you have to, you have to switch gears, and you have to be able to do that, so that you speak to your audience. Basically, is what you have to do, and that's it.
Thank you, Laura. This point about audience is crucial. Like you have to say that this is my audience, this is the person I'm speaking to. And you're trying to understand them, you're trying to understand their context, and you're speaking to them. You're not just speaking in general, you're always speaking to them. And that has to really shape what you say, how you say it, how you relate it, what, the order you follow, all of that. Next up is going to be Bruce. Bruce, go ahead.
Thanks. I haven't thought about this for a long time, and I just have to pass along a little story about when I have two daughters now. They're in their mid-20s, but when they were very young in preschool, it's a typical preschool. They wanted something, and they started whining, rolling on the floor, and whining, and I just said to them, if you whine, my answer will be an automatic no. If you want to discuss it and tell me what you want and why you want it, I'll consider it. I might change my mind. And I just didn't want to hear whining. But as it turns out, it was a beautiful thing because they learned how to express themselves constructively. And their friends came over to the house and they started whining and they gave them the elbow and said, that doesn't work with my dad. And so fast forward to high school, and there was a teacher, an English teacher, who has never given an A ever as far as urban myth goes. And my daughter went to her at the end of the year and said, I think I deserve an A. And this is what I did in my test. This is what I did in my homework. And she presented her case and talked this teacher into giving her first A. So she learned how to debate. She won best legislator in the student Congress. And so just by my not wanting to hear whining, she learned how to talk and debate. So I guess I got lucky.
Wonderful. All right. Shireen, you have any quick comments, and then we will go to the next one.
Okay, yeah, quick comments. Okay, just, if someone's like anti-gay, anti-this, anti-liberal, conservative, just tailor it to them to not offend them and not hear something you don't want to hear maybe. Or I'm in Canada, I'm in Toronto, there are like half the people are immigrants. So if you talk to someone who speaks English as a second language, you really have to slow down, use simple words, and see how they're paying attention or not. And also nationalities, like I go to parks, I talk to Canadians. I guess Americans are similar, they really don't want to talk for more than a minute or two. They're not good at talking to strangers. But if I talk to Indian people, Chinese, anyone besides Canadians, they're going to be really friendly and talk to me. And we'll talk for 10 or 15 minutes. But Canadians are really bad at short conversations with strangers, and also interrupting. That's obviously annoying. People change subjects all the time. They ignore your topic. It makes you feel not seen and heard. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. All right, so now we come to the final question. And the question is, what was new to you in this discussion? What points did you find interesting or important or useful that were new to you, whether it was in this session or the one that we did on Wednesday? You might have watched it on video, you might have participated in it. Both these conversations and conversations put together, what are you, what is new? And you're welcome to expand on that and saying, so there are two parts. One is what is new and what are you walking away with? Those are the two things I wanted to ask you. If you want, you can just talk about new, and then we can go from there. I will give you an opportunity of talking about what is it that you're walking away with separately, because first I want to hear what was new to people, what they had not thought of before, that that they found. It could be just interesting, it could be you think important, or you can think that this is useful to me, but something that is new. We'll start with Evanik, Bruce, and Joe. Evanik.
What was new for me was when someone talked about, emotional flashbacks, like when you're talking in a conversation and you have a reaction emotionally, is it about that person that's talking right now, or are you flashing back to something, to some other time, and you're having a reaction to that? So I thought that was very important. And logistics, really setting up how long do you have for the conversation. Also, Joe talked about the relationship that you have to the person. Is it an employee? Is it a best friend? Is it someone you barely know? So having that logistics set up and knowing that. So I thought those were the two things that I walked away with that were new.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Bruce, followed by Joe. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to share what you think was, what you thought was new. I would be very surprised if only 3 people found something new. Bruce.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. There was so much new that I couldn't write fast enough to keep up. And my question is, I missed the first event. This is the only one I've been to. So when you were recapping and summarizing what was covered in the first, it all sounded so good. I couldn't write fast enough, and I'm wondering if is it?
Joe, could you go ahead and put a link to the first event in the chat? Thank
wonderful,
you.
Wonderful. And the recording for this event, is there a way?
Yeah.
Where do I find that?
As soon as this is done and I edit it, it should be up within a day or so.
Where is it going to be?
Joe, if you could put a link to our channel. So Bruce, we've been doing this. This is about our 1000th meetup. We've been doing meetups, and there are videos of all the meetups available on our YouTube channel.
Thank you.
So we have a number of videos on all kinds of things, but both these, I really like this conversation. I myself will have to listen to this recording, because there are just so many points made at so much different, granularity. Because sometimes somebody may be expressing something about difficulties and stuff like that, but implicit in that is actually how conversations work and what are the various parameters. So there is a lot of richness to what we're doing. But go ahead, Bruce.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Next up is going to be Joe, Erin, and Marco. Joe.
Yeah, the main thing is logistics. Kind of setting up parameters around the conversation and kind of thinking that through. I mean, it's something I've always done intuitively. What can I express to this individual or not? But to really think about it in those types of terms. I've thought about some of the constraints, like an elevator speech or something like that. If you're speaking to someone, you're only going to have 5 minutes of their time. And how do you make those 5 minutes count? I do think about those things. But to really kind of consider the boundaries first, and work your way back from there. I think that that's an incredibly powerful lesson that I can take away from here. Yeah, no. So that would be my. There are probably more
You can go ahead and
things,
type
but
exclamation mark whenever you.
thanks. Thank you.
But I wanted to expand on this logistics point because both you and Evanik brought that up. Like, for example, Joe, the reason our meetups work is that we do this every day. Like, and people can come. And so the just the level of conversation that is possible because we do it every day. And we've been doing all these meetups every single day. That is the base. Similarly, like if you really care about somebody, I always believe in setting up a, saying, okay, you know what, this person, I need to talk to them like once a week or once a month or something like that. So that just goes as a part of logistics. So it's not just saying, okay, these are the constraints, how do I do within this, but saying, what are my goals? Like, for example, these conversations are incredibly valuable to me. I get so much from these conversations. So that's why I want to schedule them like every day at 9 p.m. So I can keep getting value. Other people can keep getting value again and again and again and again. So that is very much logistics. And that is the foundation. Go ahead, Joe. Yeah, one of the important things that has always made this work are your 4 rules as well. And those are logistics that make it, and coming up with those 4 rules, have been critical because we have so many people with so many great things to say. And you're not dogmatic about it because, you in certain cases, when somebody's on a roll and has something really good to say, that you allow that person to continue to express themselves. And so I think that's what's made it really work, is that you have a framework, but there are rules around that framework. I mean, you're willing to deviate from that framework and allow things to flow naturally. But yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah. For those who are not familiar with the rules that we have is raise your hand or type exclamation mark when you want to speak. That's one way. That's the only way you can have a conversation between, 20, 40, 80 people. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, I used to call it be brief, but actually the way I've implemented it, it is be concise. And so that integrates Joe's point. So as long as people are being concise, they can speak longer. As long as they're keeping to the topic and concisely producing per minute. The general standard that I use there is that everybody in the meetup, or at least 80% of the meetup, 80% of the people in the meetup should feel that every 2 minutes that they are glad that they lived those 2 minutes here. Okay, that's the standard that I try to use in terms of the delivery. And the last one is be courteous. So feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. This is just for the reference. And absolutely, those rules are critical, and that's logistics, because that is taken for granted, and that allows for a very complex conversation between a number of people with a variety of views. So thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Erin, Marco, and Laura. Erin.
Yeah, thanks. Excuse me. I just wanted to say, I think what I'm taking away from the meeting is just the complexity of awareness that we have in our minds as we're having conversations, that we're having awareness of ourselves, we're having awareness of the other person, the context. I mean, there's so many things that everyone mentioned tonight, but they all come down to things that we would have in our mental awareness during a conversation to make it a good conversation. And when you think of all the different aspects, I mean, that's a lot to have going on in your mind. And it's kind of amazing that humans can do that, that we could bring all of that awareness to our conversation with another person And to me, that's what stood out from the meeting, was just the complexity of things we have in our awareness that allow us to hopefully create a great conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent observation. Thank you. Marco, what did you find new that was interesting and useful?
Definitely just being like more self-aware of like what I'm feeling in the conversation, like why I'm judging or why something is bothering me and or why I'm losing interest.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Next up is Laura. Laura, what was new to you?
I can't say new to me, but I'll say what it's done for me is it's really helping me to hone me. It's putting stuff together in a very cogent way. It's giving me a clarity, which I continually need to have. I think it's been really 52 living ideas over these last 2 years for me, continuing the process of going through these things. And I think this conversation has been fantastic for me to help in continuing that process. So I really, I'm glad that I've done this two sessions. I mean, I'm older than anybody in this group, so I probably had more conversations than any of you, and have been through more conversations than anybody. So I can't say that I'm surprised that I have not learned anything new, because I'm definitely, I'm probably the senior member of this group. So I probably should have some, you should give me something for seniority,
No. Laura, I expect senior people can see so many connections already. So
Yeah.
the things that they can connect to should be much larger.
Well, I think it is much larger. It is. It's huge. It's really huge. It is. It's really huge. I don't want to sound like that. It is. It's really big. It's huge. And it's not that I see everything, but I see it new every time, because every time it's a new perspective. And that's why seeing it with these two sessions with people, conversation, it changes every time. And it's like a sculpture, it just you keep molding it, you keep chiseling it, you keep molding.
Laura, you don't want to lower expectations for people who are not as senior as you. You should always expect people as they grow up to become more curious and more, more connected to more things.
Absolutely.
As you are doing. So
there's a big world, it's a big world out there. There's a lot of conversations to be had. There's a lot of things that can happen in these conversations that you'll never think will happen. And you just got to go for it, never hold back.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So on this note, please go ahead and now you can, if you want, you're welcome to share what you got from this conversation. What did you get? How was this conversation? What did it do for you? If you would like to share, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Joe.
Yeah, no, I mean, what this conversation did for me is it started to, kind of allow me to think a little bit more about, the principles by which I'm actually having a conversation. When people are starting to articulate as to their experiences, the positive experiences, the negative experiences, I think that it makes me more aware if I'm jumping to a conclusion or not.
Mm-hmm.
and or something along those lines. Saying these things out loud is really important, because I think even, we intuitively kind of know these, but sometimes they need to be brought to the forefront. So that I think that for me, this is it's going to make me think a little bit more.
Okay, I want to do an experiment.
Go ahead.
I was talking to my friend Chase.
Chase, I hope he's going well.
He says, look, you need to ask people questions about what not to do. So think of any of these questions or all of these questions. What should you be? So the question is, what should you not be? How should you think of other people? How should you not think of other people? What's if you're screwing up, when you screw up, in what way you screw up on that? In listening, what can you do wrong? What's the most common wrong thing you can do? Next up is in terms of speaking. What can you do wrong? Okay, so flip the questions, all the 4 questions around, any of them that you want, or all of them if you want, and talk about what typically can go wrong. And what do you have to watch out for? So we'll go with Evanique, followed by Joe. Evanique.
That helped a lot. So I think the thing that popped into my head right away is like, don't think people are idiots, right? So a lot of times, like, I'll confess it. I don't want to talk to people that I don't think I will get anything from. So I will assume that I won't get anything out of this conversation. So I'll just tune the person out and go, okay, yeah. Bye. Number 2, I think how to speak. I think in terms of how to speak with respect for the other person, even if you don't like what they say, even if you think what they're saying is the most idiotic thing in the world, even if you're not even interested in what they're saying, be respectful to them. They're a person. I think in terms of, just going to go back and go to the question, what do I need to think of? What view of others should I not have? Is that they like the view I have is like they're not going to have anything to say, or this is just going to be stupid from the door, like things like that. Like you shouldn't, maybe just take away, like maybe they don't know as much as you, but that they have something to offer. And I think, yeah, so assume that the other person is as smart as you, has something valuable to bring to a conversation, and listen for it.
Wonderful. Joe.
Well, there's a lot of things to not do.
Yes.
I mean, so you don't want to deviate from what are facts, right? You don't want to just start making things up. So that's something that's kind of clear. You don't want to use canned responses, where you're just using something as a, hey, this is something, I don't know, some kind of maxim that you may use because it's something that because it kind of, you're just calling on for what you've known in the past, and you're not necessarily in the present. You're not really just responding to the conversation itself. You don't want to jump to conclusions. And you don't want to let your biases dictate your conversation as well. You don't want to be disrespectful in how you're dialing. The body language aspect of it, you don't want to necessarily, you want to be present. You don't want to necessarily be looking down, looking around, kind of actually, and that's very well done. Very, very well done. That was awesome. You don't want to just speak without clarifying what somebody else may have wanted, or may have said. You don't, I think I said you don't want to really be judgmental. So with and you don't want to repeat yourself.
Yes.
It's there you go. So that was something that I just figured out on the fly there. So that was one other thing. So there's a lot of other things as well. But
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Joe. Mike, do you want to talk about what not to do? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. There isn't really anything you should do or should not do. It's all situational.
Okay, that's Mike, that's that. Okay, we're just looking at what you should not do in a conversation.
Okay, it's all situational. You need to remember that we live in Plato's cave, and reality is not what you think it is.
I don't know where you are, Mike. I don't see the cave.
Plato described the cave, that you don't see what that you, the person that you are talking to.
Mike, let other people talk about what they got from the conversation. Next up is going to be Bruce, David, and Marco. Bruce, what did you learn about what not to do?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I like what Joseph said about not repeating yourself. That's one I want to speak. I don't really have experience about what my weaknesses are. If someone asks me a question and I give them my best thoughtful answer, and then they ask me the exact same question again, exactly the same, and then I give them the exact same answer, I feel I'm giving them the best answer I could come up with, and it hasn't changed. So I repeat myself, and then they ask me the exact same question a third time, and I don't know what to do. It really throws me off. And also being interrupted. So I believe people are most impatient when other people exhibit the faults that they have in themselves. It bothers me a lot when people interrupt me. So I think I interrupt people a lot, and I don't realize it. That's one of the things that Zoom is helping me with here, because you have to raise your hand and wait your turn. And when you finish your thought, you're done. So that is helping me. But I think one of my weaknesses that I'm trying to work on is interrupting people's thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Willow, did you want to make a comment? Willow? Okay, I'm going to mute you. All right. You had unmuted yourself, so I was wondering whether you wanted to make a comment. Next up is going to be David. David, what should you not do in terms of all these four things?
I think it's very important not to say something with confidence if you aren't sure. It's very important to build up that trust and for people to be able to trust future comments, or the credence they give to future comments. That if they see a pattern that you're either only say things with assurance when you are and not when you aren't, or that you just want to bluster, in which case you lose credibility in all future conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Great point. Marco.
I guess obviously you don't want to like pick a fight, and you also you don't want to expect the worst case scenario. Like, you want to expect a good positive outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Shireen, followed by Laura. Shireen, what should you not do?
I just wanted to say thank you for all these comments. But it's 11 p.m. where I am, and I'm just really sleepy, so I can't really put into good words. But I'm going to look at the video again and go through, because I think it's very interesting and useful to keep in mind, because many people mentioned very good comments.
Absolutely.
I think empathy is sorry, I'm sleepy. Empathy is important. Like I find that people often say, well, I don't know what to say because I haven't had that experience. But I think this is true. I mean, I've had that experience too, but often, it can be similar. So say, someone says, my husband died. Well, I've never had a husband who died, but I can relate, I've had someone else who died, or, I've had this situation, and it's sort of parallel or similar. So then I think like if some people can have maybe a bit more imagination to say, like have more empathy, because like I've been in not the same situation, but similar, and then you can kind of relate. But a lot of people like, well, I just don't know what to say, and I'm going to change the subject because I've never had that, and I, you know, like, but I don't know, maybe just have a little bit more, I don't know, imagination to think how it would be similar to something else you've had. So anyway, that's my point.
Thank you, Shireen. Laura, what are the absolute no-nos in conversation?
To act like you're the supreme being, you know, that you know it all. I think that that's a bad thing to do. I think putting somebody down in the course of the conversation is a really bad thing to do. I think planning poorly. If you're going into, if you know you're going to have a conversation specifically with someone, plan properly. Don't be arrogant about in your planning. Do it right, if you know who it is. And generally conversations are something that just at the spur of the moment. So you have to make sure if you're going to be that kind of person that you have the capability of planning quickly and doing things on the spot, so that you can get engaged in the conversation quickly. Because if you can't do that, don't bother, because you're going to be a mess.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is Bruce.
It just occurred to me, I'm also trying to not use filler words. A friend of mine told me once that I say etc. a lot. I also say and before COVID, I participated in a Toastmasters meeting, and I don't know if anybody of you have done that also, but in part of the evaluation of your speech is there's a person who's assigned to count how many ums you say, and as constructive feedback. And it's distracting because millennials, I don't do this, but millennials use like a lot, like they really say like a lot. And like one time I counted how many times he said like, and I counted 80 times in a 2-minute share, and it really distracted me. So
yes,
sorry. Thank you.
Excellent point. All right, folks, this was wonderful. I really am grateful to everybody who's here. We've been having these conversations for, ever since COVID started. We've had, close to 1,000 conversations, and it is just amazing. I'm very grateful to everybody who shows up, and the level, just because what happens is that, people genuinely sharing whatever their understanding is on the topic, you get a lot, because you can always hearing with the hardest thing. I'm not very good at it, but hardest thing is to kind of hear behind what is being said. Where is the person coming from? Because that is really, that's where a lot of the value is, because it's like many of the big things are implicitly held. They're not explicit. They're not carried explicitly in the words, but they're all implied. And a lot of the people who are really, really good at conversation are able to get to that. And they are actually addressing where the person is coming from, not just the words, not just the form in which it is being expressed, but the function that is actually leading to that expression. And that's something just wonderful. So again, I'm grateful to everybody who helps me build my ability to converse, and in the process, hopefully gets better at conversation that bleeds into everything else that they do. So conversation is what we do. And I look forward to continuing this on this scale. I particularly like these 2 meetups because these are like meta level, where we are conversing about conversation. And I look forward to continuing this, because I think there is a lot, this has legs. I think we don't engage in good enough conversation. I think, my personal take is that I think we are magnificent beings, human beings, and we have all kinds of issues. We are limited beings, like we don't know everything, but conversing, and this is Carl Rogers' idea that David was talking about, authentic relating to another human being is the simplest way of countering several things. It counters, it shows you things that you're missing. We always have wrong ideas about ourselves and others. Just by listening to what the other person is saying and saying, oh, wait a minute, they are not coming from this angle, which I always come at. Am I right, or are they right? You question those things. Then you also realize that you don't, people put up these shields between each other in order to protect themselves. After a while, you realize you don't need it in most cases. And all of that is just tremendously easy way of growing, actually. I find it to be, I'm really grateful, especially to, friends, good friends who are very open in giving feedback, both positive and negative, especially negative. I love that, because that's, instead of doing things in life which are wrong and paying for it in time and life wasted, it's much better to actually hear that from a friend and make the correction. So conversations for me are incredibly valuable. And so I really appreciate all of you. And we will continue this.